Have you ever gone to play a game and thought, wait, actually, I got a better idea. I'll just stare at it for a few seconds and then put it back. That's kinda sad for the game, but what's even more sad are the games that get flat out ignored. Most copies of Rascal Racers have given up on ever being played. It's their dream just to be stared at for a few seconds. But not all games can get our full attention, let alone any attention at all. Being relegated to storage, left underneath a bunch of stuff, left at somebody else's house, tossed in a drawer and forgotten about, and perhaps cruelest of all, hidden in plain sight. A part of your collection display but never given any attention. I got tired of the jealousy amongst my collection personally. I'd walk in on all sorts of weird stuff that had happened in my game room. Now I make a point of giving each of my games equal stare time, and if I'm playing a certain game for too long, well, what some games don't know won't hurt them, now will it? The thing is that there are a lot of different games to play, especially for retro gamers, because we're choosing from the entirety of video gaming's history. So, in order to narrow down the selection a little bit, you gotta ignore some of them. And while some of us are more successful at ignoring games by deciding not to buy certain ones in the first place during the research stage, some of us aren't. But whatever the reason may be for a game getting ignored, I've chosen 4 games that I feel shouldn't be ignored as much as they are, but that still do, for a variety of reasons. And the first game I'd like to talk about is Biker Mice from Mars for Super Nintendo. Now, to be fair, some of you may not have even heard of this game before, and you can't really ignore something if you don't know about it. Did you know that decorative banana wiener dogs are something? Well, now you do, so stop ignoring them. Biker Mice from Mars is one of those games where when people are doing research on Super Nintendo games, they read the name of it and think, psh, well, I know that's not a good game. But here's the thing, the game is basically the closest thing to a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles racing game on the Super Nintendo. Much like the Ninja Turtles, Biker Mice from Mars was a cartoon centered around a group of anthropomorphic, not turtles, but mice. Because like turtles, people love mice. And regardless of how you'd compare the shows, the theme provides a similar energy for the video game, and most importantly, the game was made by Konami. When it comes to racing games on the Super Nintendo, many people are quick to suggest Mario Kart, F-Zero, and even Rock and Roll Racing before this one, which often gets ignored, and nothing against those other games, but I have by far the most fun playing this one. The experience feels perfectly balanced to me. It's got a great arcade feel to it. The difficulty is just right. The music is all super fun. There's just the right amount of game modes, and you get to say you like a game that has a silly name. The main mode is especially addictive to play, where you have to keep placing well enough to advance further. There's a handful of upgrades you can purchase with money in between races, and the money itself can be earned either by placing more highly or through an item in the game that you tend to get more often while you're in the lead. So even when you're dominating in first place, it's still interesting because you're trying to earn more money in addition to holding on to the lead. The key to the racing itself is all about how well you can drift through the turns, much like other racing games. And as you'd suspect, you can do this with the R button. Each character also has a special ability which can be used a certain number of times after each lap completed. And of course, like I mentioned before, you'll also get different items that you can use. Always a blast to play through this one, but for my next game, I'd like to suggest Shining Force, and specifically Shining Force 2. When it comes to strategy RPGs, and heck, just grid-based strategy games in general, most people will look at something like the Fire Emblem, Final Fantasy Tactics, or Advance Wars series first. But look at Shining Force 2, because gosh darn it, these games are really fun. They're not quite as complex as later strategy games, but I still think there's enough here, and the challenge is there to keep it plenty interesting. There's a fun little exploration-based RPG experience to be had between the battles, where finding the next battle always feels like a reward. But if I had to point out the biggest thing this game has going for it compared to other games in the genre, it would be how snappy the gameplay is. I mean, just look at how quick things are moving along. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love other strategy games where you're spending a lot of time plotting each move. I just find Shining Force is a nice change of pace, while still having enough meat on the bones. Shining Force, other games. Shining Force, other games. I've always loved the sprite work in this game too, especially during the battle sequences. And if you've ever played a strategy game like this before, you know you're gonna be looking at those battle animations a lot. So if you like what you're looking at, then look no further than Shining Force on the Genesis. Great for people either just getting into the genre or longtime fans. Next up, we've got a bit of a dirty dog decision on my part, and that would be GoldenEye 007. The game people love to say hasn't aged well. And despite being as popular as it was back in the day, a lot of people ignore it now. I'd ask that you please just hear me out on this one. Okay, so from a technical standpoint, yeah, there's some things that are rough. The frame rate, the visuals, all of which people might be willing to forgive if it weren't for the controls. Criticized for being hard to go back to because they don't feel the way today's first-person shooter controls do with two analog sticks. But here's the thing, the game doesn't play like modern first-person shooters either. A lot of the game isn't about precise aiming the way more recent first-person shooters are. It's more about strafing in and out of position, which is easily done with the left and right C buttons. And the game has a very light auto-aim feature for a reason, so that you can be rewarded for getting into good position. To play this game well, you want to keep moving, and you don't need to be looking up and down so much with the up and down C buttons. This is the main mistake I think a lot of people make. It's unnecessary for aiming and awkward. Stop trying to look up and down, doofus. And the other mistake people make is stopping their movement to try to aim. You almost never need to do that in the heat of battle. Just keep moving around with the analog stick and strafe like crazy with the left and right C buttons until you're in position to blast the enemies. You'll certainly need to adjust to this, but once you do, I think the game still plays great. And believe me, I went through the same adjustment period a lot of you have. Also, I'll quickly mention that people like to bring up how you can play the game with two N64 controllers in order to have two analog sticks, but in my experience, that's more just an interesting thing to bring up than it is something that actually works out the way you'd hope, like not eating carbs. But besides the controls, I feel like a lot of people forgot what made this game so fun to begin with. The game was notable for the way the missions were designed, with a list of objectives you had to figure out for each stage in order to complete it, adding intrigue to each level, and James Bond being the perfect universe for such a thing, with the very in-depth briefings you could view before each level. But as elaborate and as well put together as the missions are, the game is also incredibly goofy in the best possible way. Besides stuff like the wacky cheat codes, DK mode, and Odd Job, the little dirty dog, there's the enemies' faces, the sounds they make, and the way they animate as they get blasted away is so satisfying. To me, the physics are a huge part of this. The awkwardness makes it more fun. This game has personality and a certain heart and soul that is the reason why all the Bond games to follow have had such a hard time living up to it. Oh, and my goodness, the music. It's incredible, which is no surprise for a game made by Rare on the Nintendo 64. I still get so much enjoyment from this game, and I know some people simply won't be convinced. I understand that, but I don't care. To me, it's as much fun to play as it ever was. Okay, and for the final game that I want to mention, we have Nights into Dreams. Christmas! Yeah, I didn't forget what time of year this video was getting posted. The original Nights into Dreams is already a candidate for a game that gets ignored because it's a Saturn game and one that just feels too abstract for some people. But on top of that, you have people who do play and love Nights into Dreams but ignore the Christmas version because they figure, why would I need the Christmas version if I already have the regular version? Plus, I mean, you must only be able to play this game around Christmas time, right? I mean, something bad must happen otherwise. Well, quick little secret for you. I once played the game in July, and believe it or not, nothing bad happened, at least not until later that night, and it wasn't a dream. Personally, I've always loved the idea of having a Christmas edition of the game, even being a much smaller, basically remixed version of the original, but it would have been cool to see them do this for other holidays too, a missed opportunity if you ask me. Christmas Nights is basically like a fan letter for fans of Nights, and fans of Christmas, I suppose, with some cool bonus material. You can even play as Sonic and run around the stage with a reskinned Dr. Robotnik boss to beat. How cool is that? But with that about does it for the games that I wanted to bring up, at least for now, as this list of games could be endless, but these were all games that I felt strongly about and wanted to make the case for. A lot of you might think I'd mention my beloved Rocket Knight Adventures, but come on now, everyone plays and loves Rocket Knight Adventures by now, right? Right? That said, I'd be curious what you all thought of the games I mentioned, as well as which games you would nominate. I feel like some of you will give matching answers to each other too. You always seem to be on the same page about certain things. So leave your responses down below, and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the retro bird, yeah, and he's talking about video games. He's